Dr. Rowan today is in the University of Cambridge, and he is a great scholar in his own right. And over the past several years, he has visited Singapore many times, and we are happy to have him here this time with us. We hope to have the benefit of his experiences and wisdom, especially as we talk about religion and faith, and public space and secular and secularism. One of the things this morning I had to do is to talk about how do we try to understand Islam in the contemporary world, because we are just alarmed by all these competitive dynamics between Islam and the West. So I suppose faith in the public space is a very important topic in these days and times, and we look forward to exchange views with you, Dr. Rowan, after you give us your opening comments on how you see this topic. And you have been given a briefing by our colleagues from the SRP, which is a very important program of the RSIS. We study inter-religious relations in a multiracial society. And over the past year or two, our colleagues in this program have been organizing themselves and trying to bring in more ideas and understanding, and hopefully they should launch their study program soon, the master's program and the executive program, so that we can share our findings, our studies, our research with more people, and hopefully create more understanding across all the different religions. So without further ado, sir, I'd like to invite you to make some comments, and maybe after 10-15 minutes, we can invite the rest of the colleagues around the table to contribute comments and maybe ask you questions, difficult one, I hope, so we can find some answers to our own inquiries and dilemma in our mind. Please proceed, Dr. Rowan.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador. And thank you for the opportunity to visit RSIS. It's to me a great privilege and a great honour to be invited to take part in these conversations, and to look also at the plans that the school has for this proposed master's degree in religious relations.
More chair over here. Yes, please.
I'm grateful to all of you for giving up the time for this conversation. And I've been asked to speak for up to 10 minutes just to introduce one or two themes, and hope then that there'll be some questions and some comments. I don't promise to give any very definitive answers, but I will do my best. So it struck me that it might help if I picked up just a few themes which I touched on in my book on faith in the public square, which I think one or two of you have read, and add one or two extra thoughts which may stimulate some discussion. And I'm very glad that we've already had reference to the notion of secularism, because in the book and in some other lectures and other contexts, I've argued that it's important to distinguish between two different kinds of secularism. One is what I called programmatic secularism. That is the idea that societies, in order to function well, need to have religion off the map. That is, they need to operate in a way which excludes religion from public comment, representation, and so forth. Everyone is free to practice religion in private, but in public there's a strictly defined secular space. And this, of course, has been the approach often associated with post-revolutionary France. In French, people talk about laïcité, the state of lay, non-clerical, non-church, non-religious identity in a society. And when religious people of all kinds criticize secularism, very often what they're criticizing is what I call programmatic secularism, that is, the exclusive demarking of the public space. But I've suggested that there is another kind of secularism, which I've called procedural, which is rather different. Procedural secularism, I suggest, is the assumption that in society no one religious discourse has the power to dictate what happens, that in public debate you may expect that religious considerations will not automatically settle problems, but at the same time you will take it for granted that religious perspectives will be expressed in public debate, that there is public discussion of religious issues, and that religious identities are not exclusively a private matter. And, of course, the example of procedural secularism that's most obvious, especially in this part of the world, is probably India. India will often say very eloquently and proudly, we are a secular state. And after 24 hours in any place in India, you'll think, secular? But I understand what they mean, and I think what they mean is what I call procedural secularism. No one religious community in India, in theory, dictates. One of the problems, of course, posed by some elements in the BJP in India is that vision is slightly threatened. Or again, the origins of Pakistan in Muhammad Ali Jinnah's vision of what kind of society it was to be were secular in that sense. But of course, in the last few decades in Pakistan, that again has been, especially after the regime of Zia-ul-Haq, a rather different picture. But anyway, that's one point I'd want to put on the table at the beginning. It's quite important in our modern world to be completely realistic about the fact of religious diversity. But I'm suggesting that to acknowledge real religious diversity is not to say the only way of managing it is programmatic secularism, blotting out religious conviction. Why might this be important? I move on to a second point then. It seems to me that in public debate on major moral issues, it's very important that people's deepest motivations can be expressed, scrutinized, discussed. It's not much use having major public discussions about moral and social questions in which people never come clean, as you might say, about where their convictions come from. At the moment in the UK, we're in the middle of yet another discussion about whether physician-assisted suicide should be legal. I have a strong view on that, which won't surprise you, but it seems to me to be quite useless to have a discussion on that subject, which didn't at some point allow me to say, well, my views on this are actually deeply informed by a vision of human nature and human destiny, shaped by my religious belief, and you need to know that. And if we are thus allowed to bring our motivation into public debate, I think it makes for a clearer, a more respectful, a more honest, and actually a more rich public discussion. If we were trying to settle some major public moral question, whether it's assisted suicide or what we're to do about refugees, or what we might do about our armaments program, we were trying to discuss those things purely in terms of what the government of the day decides is useful or relevant, we would have a very thin and a very unproductive discussion. At some point, people need to open up the world to a wider range, a wider frame of reference than any political system can manage. And that's why I've sometimes expressed this in these terms, that to be a good citizen in any society, you need to be more than just a citizen. To be a good citizen, you need to be more than just a citizen. In other words, you belong, you hope, creatively, constructively, to a political order, you play your part in it, but it's not the only community, the only solidarity that defines you. To be a good citizen, you have to be more than a citizen. Your belonging as a citizen has to be grounded in some deeper sense of belonging. And religious communities would say what is important is that your belonging, ultimately, is a belonging in the creation of a good God. Your belonging is a belonging to a human race which is linked together by something more than political decision or convenience. You are, before all else, someone summoned to a response and a relation with the endlessly holy life on which all things depend. And even if you are a secularist of my first kind, even if you're a programmatic unbeliever, you may still want to say there is some dimension of your human identity, your belonging, which is not contained and confined just by being a citizen. Because if your action in society, your action as a citizen, is drawn out of a deep sense of who you are as a person, you'll be bringing more to the public life of a society than you would if the only thing in your mind was your civic identity. My worry about programmatic secularism, as I've called it, is that it says there is an area in which you can behave as if you had no other affiliations, as if you were simply an individual faced with the state. And that is an error which I think in the last 100 years has been committed by both the left and the right in European politics. The late Margaret Thatcher famously said on one occasion, "There is no such thing as society." I don't think she meant exactly what people have taken her to mean, but people understood that as saying, well, there are just two realities. There's the state and there's the individual. There's government, power, there's the individual. And that's it. And therefore, the more of the state there is, the less of the individual, the more of the individual, the less of the state. I suspect that most people thinking about it would say that is a very unsatisfactory grid on which to understand human relations, because we belong already by our birth, our conviction, in any number of ways, to different kinds of solidarities, different kinds of communities. A good society or state will work with an acknowledgement that we all belong in different areas, in different ways. And that's part of what I mean by saying more is brought to the table if that is acknowledged, than if we all have to pretend that we were individuals faced with the impersonal state. And speaking here as a Christian theologian, this seems to me a theme that has emerged very strongly both in Catholic social teaching and in the theology of many of the greatest Protestant writers of the 20th century. On the one hand, you have that great tradition of reflection represented by a series of papal encyclicals right up to the recent teaching of Pope Francis. On the other hand, you have the memory of great figures like the Protestant theologian Karl Barth, resisting the Third Reich and arguing, as he did famously right up to the 1950s, that the Christian in society was always going to be an unreliable ally for any government, because the Christian did not have his or her agenda fixed by a political party. Therefore, the Christian is going to be an unreliable ally. It's a mischievous observation, but I think a good one. So, something about secularism, something about the need for us to be more than just citizens. Third point that arises from that is a difficult one, because It's something to do with how we understand our loyalty. What are we loyal to? What are we faithful to? From time to time, there are collisions between the state and religious bodies, where a religious body is suspected of being disloyal to the state or society it's in. In 16th century England, if you were a Catholic, it was taken for granted that you must be disloyal to the Queen of England. In 1930s Germany, it was assumed that if you were really loyal to the international vision of the Christian Church, you were being disloyal to the Third Reich. There are people in my own country who think that if you're a Muslim, you're automatically disloyal to the government of the United Kingdom. In, I think, 8th, 9th century China, if you were a Buddhist, it was assumed that you were disloyal to the political system. So it goes on. Most of these critical points reflect both a reality and a misunderstanding. The reality is that the religious believer, whether Catholic in the 16th century, Buddhist in the 9th, Muslim in the 21st, most of these people would say, the state commands my loyalty in all the things that belong to the state. What it cannot do is command my loyalty in conscience. It can't force my conscience. And that's the reality. The misunderstanding is that that means you are automatically against the state. And getting that balance right is quite complicated. But it's expressed for me in one of the stories of the second Christian century, where a group of North African slaves are being put on trial for their Christian conviction. Their judge in the court asks them to declare their loyalty to the Roman Emperor by enacting an act of worship of the Roman Emperor. You drop incense on the fire in front of the picture of the Emperor. That's what loyalty means. The Emperor is divine. The slaves who are on trial reply, we will pay our taxes, we will pray for the Emperor, we will support what is asked of us and do our public duty, but what we will not do is pretend that our loyalty means worship. It's a critical loyalty, a thoughtful loyalty, a loyalty informed by wider convictions and wider commitments. One last thing to say, which again emerges here and there in the book that I published, but is to me one of the most searching, difficult areas of thinking about religion. It's to do with the nature of power. But it arises out of what I've just been saying. The person who is prepared to take a risk in denying the state its absolute power is not trying to set up another absolute power in opposition. The person who takes the risk of martyrdom, suffering for conscience, is a person who appeals to another kind of power that is not violent and political. And the greatest risk that attends the life of religious communities through the centuries is the temptation to think religious power is just the same as other sorts of power, only religious. And most religious traditions have, at one time or another, bought into that model. Religious power is really the same as other kinds. But all our major faith traditions, in effect, say to us, in religious communities, power is the power to liberate the spirit. And people who exercise power within religious communities are not there to control, but to liberate a relationship with God, which allows you to be human in a full way. That's religious authority, that's religious power. And just as in various ways we have all of us come to recognize the impossibility or impropriety of trying to compel people's faith. I think that involves the recognition that the sorts of power we're talking about are different. The Quran famously says there is no compulsion in matters of religion. We in the Christian world have come round rather slowly to belief in religious liberty, freedom of conscience. And behind that, I think, lies this notion deeply embedded, I think, in authentic religion. The power that matters in religion is a power that liberates, a power that sets free, a relationship which transforms a person to be human in the way they're meant to be. Any other kind of power, which just seeks to make someone an instrument of somebody else, is a distortion, a blasphemy. And that's why the crisis of loyalty that sometimes arises is not a collision between two political powers, one of them with a collar around its neck and the other not. It's a collision of two visions of power. And sometimes that means that the world's power will win. Those who protested against the tyranny of Protestant rule in 16th century England died. Those Protestants who protested against the tyranny of Nazism in the 1930s, many of them died. And people of faith believe that's not a failure, and that's not just a matter of powerlessness, but an affirmation of another kind of power. But being clear about that is quite hard work sometimes, and not always obvious as we discuss it. It's something which the wider world doesn't always appreciate about the nature of religion, but I think it's a fundamental point about what makes religious commitment something other than just another form of political belonging. And that's why, to come back finally to where I started, that's why procedural secularism, recognition that societies work by allowing these convictions to emerge. Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, others need not panic about that, as if that were a kind of resignation of power into the hands of someone else. They recognize that the world around, the society we're in, may or may not agree, endorse, support this particular religious conviction, this particular moral priority, but that we have the right to express it, to argue it, and to live by it. And if secularism allows that space, secularism is a good and acceptable thing. And from what I see, the society we're in here in Singapore is one which, in its proud recognition of religious diversity, implicitly takes something of that as its background.